You're standing in the cereal aisle and your 4-year-old is on the floor. Not sitting, horizontal, arms out, making a sound that isn't quite crying and isn't quite screaming but is somehow both at once. You said no to the box with the cartoon toucan on it, and now this. People are looking. You feel heat moving up your neck. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a thought surfaces that you'd never say out loud. What is wrong with my kid? Nothing is wrong with your kid. That's the first thing worth knowing. The second thing, and this is where most parenting advice gets it backwards, is that the behavior you're watching in that aisle isn't a problem to be solved. It's information being transmitted. Your child doesn't have the equipment yet to send that information any other way, which is precisely why they're sending it like this. Most parents believe that tantrums, emotional meltdowns, and communication shutdowns are behavioral issues, signs of poor discipline, or a child testing limits, or a phase that needs to be managed out of existence. What the research in developmental psychology actually shows is something quite different. These moments aren't failures of behavior. They're the entirely predictable output of a brain that is, in the most literal neurological sense, not finished yet. By the end of this video, you'll understand what's actually happening in your child's brain and body during these moments, why the most common parenting responses, though completely well-intentioned, can accidentally make things harder, and what a few small, low-effort shifts in how you talk and respond can do to the way your child develops emotionally over time. Not overnight. Over time, that distinction matters, and we'll come back to it. The brain your child is working with right now is not a smaller version of yours. It's a genuinely different organ, at a genuinely different stage of construction. The part of the brain most responsible for emotional regulation, for pausing before reacting, for putting feelings into words, for understanding that a bad moment isn't a permanent state, is the prefrontal cortex. It sits right behind your forehead. In adults, it acts like a thoughtful senior manager. It receives emotional signals, evaluates them, and decides how to respond. In children under 5, that manager is essentially still being hired. The prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed until the mid-20s, and in toddlers and young children, it has almost no authority over what happens next when a strong emotion arrives. What does have authority in those moments is the amygdala, a small, almond-shaped structure deeper in the brain that operates more like a smoke detector than a manager. It doesn't evaluate. It reacts. When the amygdala senses threat, discomfort, frustration, overwhelm, or even just unexpected change, it sends an alarm signal through the nervous system, and the body responds before the thinking brain has any say in the matter. Heart rate increases, muscles tense. In young children, who haven't yet built the neural pathways to interrupt that cascade, the alarm just runs until it's done. This is why telling a child in the middle of a meltdown to calm down or use your words so rarely works. The part of the brain that processes language and generates words is temporarily offline. The alarm is too loud. It's not defiance, it's neurology. There's another layer here that's worth understanding, and it's called the window of tolerance, a concept developed by psychiatrist Dan Siegel. Every person, at any age, has a range of emotional arousal within which they can think, respond, and function. Too little stimulation and you're disengaged. Too much and you're overwhelmed. Inside that window, your child can learn, communicate, play, and connect. Outside it, whether they've tipped into overwhelm or shutdown, none of those things are available to them. The goal of emotional support for children this age isn't to eliminate emotional spikes. It's to help children return to that window quickly and gradually, over years of repeated experience, to widen it. There's also the concept of co-regulation, which is the process by which a calm nervous system, yours, physically helps regulate a dysregulated one. Children's nervous systems are not self-contained yet. They literally borrow regulatory capacity from the adults around them. When you stay calm in the presence of your child's storm, you're not just modeling behavior, you're providing a neurological scaffold. Their system reads yours and over time starts to stabilize against it. So already you can see that the exchange between parent and child during a hard moment is not a power struggle. It's a biological process. The most common misreading of young children's emotional behavior is the belief that intensity means manipulation. Your child screams, so they must be trying to get something. Your child cries at drop-off every single morning for 3 weeks, so they must be trying to make you feel guilty. Your child refuses every food you offer except plain crackers, so they must be being difficult on purpose. This is a completely understandable interpretation, because from the outside, these behaviors do look strategic. They happen at specific moments. They produce specific responses from you, and sometimes they stop just as suddenly as they started, which really does make it look like a decision was made. But here's what the research on child brain development consistently shows. Intentional manipulation requires a level of theory of mind, the ability to model what another person is thinking and feeling, and use that model to influence their behavior, that most children aren't reliably capable of until around age 4. And even then it's inconsistent. A 2-year-old having a meltdown over the wrong cup is not running a psychological operation. They are overwhelmed and they have no other way to say so. The second common misreading is that emotional intensity means something is wrong with the child's attachment or temperament. Parents sometimes worry that a child who melts down frequently is anxious, insecurely attached, or on a trajectory toward emotional dysregulation as an adult. This worry is understandable. Nobody wants that for their child. But it gets the causality backwards. Frequent emotional outbursts in early childhood are not a sign that something has gone wrong with the relationship. In many cases, they're a sign that the child feels safe enough to fall apart in front of you. Children who feel genuinely unsafe with a caregiver don't melt down in their presence. They shut down, or they perform. The meltdown, uncomfortable as it is, often means the relationship is doing what it's supposed to do. The third misreading involves language. When you ask your child, "How was your day?" and they say fine or nothing at all, most parents interpret this as disinterest or secretiveness, or a sign that the child doesn't want to connect. What it usually is, though, is a question that lands beyond the child's current retrieval ability. Episodic memory, the ability to consciously recall a sequence of events from the recent past and narrate it to someone else, is still developing well into middle childhood. Asking a 5-year-old to summarize their day is a bit like asking someone to describe a dream. 3 hours after waking up, the felt sense is there, but the narrative architecture to reconstruct it on demand hasn't fully formed. It's not that nothing happened, it's that the question is asking for a skill the child doesn't reliably have yet. The question you ask instead doesn't need to be complicated, it just needs to be smaller. We'll get to that. One of the most replicated findings in developmental psychology is that emotional regulation is a learned skill, not an inborn trait. And it's learned primarily through repeated co-regulation with a responsive caregiver, not through practice in isolation. This is significant because it runs counter to a fairly common instinct, which is to give children space to work through their feelings on their own. The idea behind this is good. You want your child to build independence, to develop resilience, to not feel like they need a parent to manage every emotional moment, but the research on how regulation is actually built in the brain tells a different story. Neuroscientist Alan Shaw's work on right brain development shows that the neural circuits responsible for emotional regulation are literally shaped by the experience of being regulated in relationship. A child who is consistently met with calm presence during distress doesn't just feel better in the moment, they are, over time, building different neural architecture, more connections between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, more capacity to interrupt the alarm cycle before it runs to completion. In other words, you being present and calm during your child's hard moments is not spoiling them. It's construction work. A second major finding involves what researchers call sensitive responsiveness, and it comes out of John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth's original attachment research, later expanded by many others. Sensitive responsiveness means responding to what the child is actually communicating, not what you wish they were communicating. Ainsworth's strange situation studies, conducted across decades in multiple cultures, consistently found that children whose caregivers responded accurately, noticing distress early, reading signals correctly, and responding in ways that matched the child's actual need, developed what's called secure attachment. And secure attachment, the research shows, predicts a remarkably wide range of later outcomes: better peer relationships, higher academic resilience, lower rates of anxiety, greater capacity for emotional intimacy in adulthood. The mechanism isn't mysterious. A child who is consistently understood develops an internal model of the world in which understanding is available. That model shapes every relationship they'll enter afterward. The third finding involves language, specifically the gap between emotional experience and emotional vocabulary, and what happens when you bridge it. Research by psychologist Lisa Feldman Barrett and others, working in the field of constructed emotion, shows that humans don't just feel emotions and then find words for them. The words we have available actually shape how the emotion is experienced. A child who only has access to mad and sad experiences their emotional landscape very differently from a child who has words for frustrated, disappointed, embarrassed, overwhelmed, and nervous. Teaching emotion vocabulary, not through worksheets, but through casual, in-the-moment narration, literally increases a child's ability to regulate. When the brain can label an emotional state precisely, the prefrontal cortex engages more reliably. Naming it changes it, in a neurological sense. This is sometimes called affect labeling, and it's one of the most low-effort, high-return investments a parent can make. The fourth finding concerns what Lev Vygotsky called the zone of proximal development, the gap between what a child can do independently and what they can do with support. This concept is usually applied to academic learning, but it maps perfectly onto emotional development. Your child's current ability to regulate themselves is not their ceiling. It's their floor, with you not in the room. When you're present, when you're calm, when you narrate and reflect and stay connected, you're functioning as a temporary scaffold for capacity that will eventually become their own. The key word is eventually. Scaffolding that's provided consistently and then gradually withdrawn. Not withheld, not suddenly removed, but gently reduced as the child grows, produces genuine independence. Scaffolding that's never provided doesn't produce independence. It produces a child who manages by contracting rather than expanding. Here's what some of these dynamics actually look like in the ordinary texture of a day together. Your child is 3, and you just told them it's time to leave the playground. They've been playing happily for 40 minutes. They say no, then louder. No, then their face shifts, and you can see the wave coming. By the time you get to them, they're already crying and pulling away from your hand. What's happening underneath this is a collision between an underdeveloped capacity for transitioning. Moving from a desired state to an undesired one requires prefrontal involvement that 3-year-olds have in limited supply, and the felt experience of something good being taken away. There's no future in the 3-year-old's emotional landscape. There's only right now, and right now, something they love is ending. The response that escalates this is matching their urgency with yours. Grabbing the hand more firmly, speaking louder, repeating "we have to go now" in escalating tones, or introducing a consequence that the child, in this state, cannot process. The response that helps is the opposite of what your own nervous system wants to do in that moment. It's slowing down, getting low, saying something like, "I know, it's really hard to stop when you're having fun," not as a trick, not as a technique to get compliance faster, but because that statement is true, and the child's system needs to feel that the truth has been received before it can move. Your child is 5, and every single morning at preschool drop-off they cry. You have tried everything: arriving early, arriving late, giving warnings, not giving warnings, special goodbye rituals, fast goodbyes, slow goodbyes. Nothing has changed it. You are starting to wonder whether something is wrong with the environment, or with your child, or with what you're doing. What's probably happening here is not distress about the school. It's the activation of the attachment system at the moment of separation, which is exactly what the attachment system is designed to do. In John Bowlby's framework, the attachment system is an alarm that activates when the primary caregiver moves out of proximity. It was designed by evolution to keep small humans safe. It doesn't care whether the environment they're being left in is warm and wonderful. It cares about proximity to the caregiver. Most children who cry at drop-off are, teachers will tell you, fine within minutes. The transition itself is the hard part, not the destination. The response that helps here is one that is consistent, brief, and genuinely warm, not rushed, not elongated. A ritual that is the same every time sends the nervous system the message: this transition has a known shape. Known shapes are less alarming than unknown ones. Hovering at the door, coming back to check, or communicating your own anxiety through your face or voice doesn't provide more comfort. It actually confirms to the child's alarm system that there is something to be alarmed about. Your child is 7 and comes home from school, every day looking slightly hollowed out. They don't want to talk. They want a snack and the couch. You ask how their day was. They say fine, and that's the end of it. What's happening here is fairly literal. School, for children with developing sensory and social processing, is genuinely exhausting in ways that adults often underestimate. Managing social dynamics, sitting still, regulating behavior in a structured environment, handling the sensory input of a classroom, these are all cognitively and neurologically expensive activities. By the time your child gets home, they are depleted. The tank is low. How was your day? Asks them to now perform a narrative retrieval task on an empty tank. The response that helps is no question at all, just presence, snack, maybe proximity without demand. Children often start talking, really talking, about 20 or 30 minutes after they've had time to decompress. The conversation that wasn't available at 3:15 becomes available at 3:45, not because you asked better questions, but because you waited. Your child is 4 and has been refusing everything for dinner except crackers and plain pasta for 2 weeks. Every meal is a negotiation or a fight. You are worried about nutrition, about pickiness becoming permanent, about whether you're enabling something. What's almost certainly happening is a combination of sensory sensitivity. Many children in this age range have heightened responses to texture, smell, and taste, and these aren't preferences so much as genuine neurological sensitivity and the establishment of autonomy and control over the body, which is a developmentally appropriate drive that emerges strongly around age 2 and continues through early childhood. The body is one of the few things a young child has genuine control over. The response that tends to escalate food conflict is pressure, commentary on what's being left on the plate, or visible parental anxiety about intake. These things make the table feel like a battlefield, and battlefields are not places where children relax and try new things. Research by pediatric feeding specialist Ellen Satter on what she calls the division of responsibility shows that outcomes improve reliably when parents take charge of what is offered and when, and children take charge of whether and how much they eat. This doesn't mean crackers forever. It means lowering the stakes enough that eating stops being a power struggle, which is the only condition under which the child's natural curiosity about food can resurface. The practical shift that tends to matter most isn't a new routine or a new rule, it's a new understanding. Because when you understand what's driving the behavior, your response changes naturally. The first shift is from interpreting behavior as intentional to interpreting it as communicative. When your child melts down, try noticing the question, "What is my child trying to tell me?" before the question, "How do I stop this?" These aren't the same question, and they lead to very different responses. You don't have to know the answer immediately. Often just holding the question changes your tone, which changes the child's nervous system, which changes what happens next. The second shift is in the language you use after hard moments. Most parent-child conversations about emotional events happen during or immediately after, when the child's brain is still coming down from activation and genuinely cannot process much. The research suggests that the most useful conversations happen later, much later, sometimes hours later, when both of you are calm and connected and doing something neutral together. "I've been thinking about what happened at the store earlier" opens a very different conversation than "Why did you behave like that?" The first one invites. The second one puts a child on trial. The third shift is in how you ask about your child's inner life. The next time you want to ask how their day was, try something smaller and more specific instead. Did anything feel hard today? Or, was there a moment that was funny? Or, who did you eat lunch next to? These aren't trick questions. They're smaller doors into the same room, and smaller doors are easier to open when you're 5 or 7 or 10. The fourth shift is toward narrating what you see, rather than asking children to explain themselves. "You seem really tired" is more useful than "Why are you acting this way?" "I can see that was disappointing" lands differently than "Stop crying, it's not a big deal." These narrations do two things at once. They teach emotion vocabulary passively, just by modeling it, and they signal to the child that their inner state has been noticed, which is the single most powerful precursor to that inner state settling down. The fifth shift is the hardest one and the most important one, and it has nothing to do with your child. It involves noticing your own activation, the heat in your neck in the cereal aisle, the tightening in your chest at drop-off, and recognizing that your nervous system's response to your child's dysregulation is the variable you have the most access to. You can't regulate your child's amygdala directly, but your own calm body, your own slower voice, your own grounded presence does something real and measurable in their neurological environment. This isn't about being perfect. It's about coming back to neutral as quickly as you can, as often as you can, without requiring yourself to never leave it. Back to the cereal aisle. Your 4-year-old is on the floor. The cartoon toucan is involved. People are looking. You know now what you didn't know before, which is that the alarm is running and the thinking brain is offline, and that the only thing that will actually help in the next 60 seconds is you not adding more alarm to the environment. So you do something that feels slightly counterintuitive. You crouch down. You don't try to fix it, or explain it, or make it stop faster. You say something quiet. "That felt really unfair," not because it produces instant compliance, which it won't, but because it's true, and because your child's system is looking for a signal that the storm has been witnessed and that you're still there. It doesn't end in a second, probably takes 3 minutes, but the wave does pass, the way waves do. And you leave the store, maybe without the crackers, maybe with them, and your child is holding your hand and talking about something entirely unrelated. The way children do when they've come back through the window. That's the whole game, really. Not eliminating the hard moments. Staying present through them in a way that teaches your child, over hundreds of small repetitions across years, that hard moments are survivable and that they don't have to survive them alone. That knowledge, more than almost anything else you could give them, is what they'll carry forward.